Story 1. In rural Pennsylvania, just beyond the ghost town of Hollow Creek, sits a cemetery that no one visits, the Hollow Graveyard. Official records list it as decommissioned, but locals say it never should have existed at all. Every few decades, someone goes missing, always last seen near those rusted black gates. 17-year-old Kyle and his friends, Emma, Josh, and Lacey, were filming paranormal content for their YouTube channel. On Halloween night, they dared each other to spend the night in the hollow. Armed with cameras, flashlights, and bravado, they crossed the threshold just as the moon disappeared behind storm clouds. The moment they stepped inside, the iron gates slammed shut behind them. They rushed back, locked. Josh tried to climb, but the metal burned his hands. Lacey joked nervously, "Guess we're staying till morning." No one laughed. Wandering between leaning gravestones, Emma noticed something eerie. The names on the stones weren't just old. They matched missing persons from decades ago. Some were recent. One gravestone read, Kyle Thomas, 2007 to 2023. That was his full name, and this was his current year. Josh suddenly screamed. He said he'd heard someone whisper his name directly into his ear, though no one was near him. The audio on his camera confirmed it, a deep, feminine voice whispering, "Not you, not yet." As they tried to retrace their steps, they found the layout had changed. Paths were gone. New graves had appeared. Some had fresh dirt. One had Kyle's backpack lying on it, though he'd never dropped it. He picked it up and saw his own handwriting carved into the wooden cross behind it. "I should have left." They decided to stick together, but Emma vanished between two graves without a sound. No footsteps, no scream. Only her phone remained, its flashlight still on. The last video showed her turning, eyes wide with fear, whispering, "Don't look at her eyes." Lacey saw her first, across the misty field, a woman in a tattered black funeral gown, with a long black veil covering her face. She didn't move like a person. She floated just above the ground, gliding toward them. Josh threw a stone at her. She stopped and smiled. The group ran and found an open grave that hadn't been there before. It was wide and deep, and inside lay dozens of corpses, eyes wide open, mouths silently screaming. One of them was Emma. Kyle pulled Lacey back before she could jump in after her. They hid inside a stone crypt. Scratched on the walls were old journal entries from 1888. "The hollow is not a graveyard, it's a doorway. It feeds every 13 years. One lives, three die." Josh realized this year marked exactly 13 years since the last documented disappearance. Lacey's body began to twist unnaturally, her voice layered with something inhuman. She turned to Kyle and hissed, "I see her now." Then her body contorted backwards and collapsed, lifeless. Josh screamed, but Kyle held him back. "It chose her," he whispered. The woman in black appeared again. She approached slowly. This time she spoke. "One may leave if one offers blood." Josh, broken and trembling, pulled out his pocket knife. Before Kyle could stop him, Josh slit his own throat and collapsed into the dirt. The ground swallowed him. The gates creaked open. Kyle stumbled out just before dawn. He looked back. The hollow graveyard was gone. Just empty woods. No graves. No gates. But every year on Halloween, his name reappears on a stone in the empty field, and he hears her whisper, "We remember." Story 2. While cleaning out her grandmother's attic in Virginia, college student Rachel found an old hand-drawn map labeled Crimson Oaks Cemetery, a graveyard she'd never heard of, scribbled on the back, "Never walk the path after dusk." The dead don't sleep there. Rachel and her friend Marcus decided to find it. GPS couldn't locate it, but the map led them deep into the Appalachian woods. There it was, silent, unmarked, surrounded by towering crimson-leafed oak trees, though it was the middle of winter. The wind around the cemetery didn't howl. It laughed. As they walked between crumbling graves, they heard soft, childlike giggles. Rachel turned, but no one was there. Marcus said, "It's just the wind." But the laughter answered back, mimicking his voice. Near the center was a tiny grave marked only with a wooden rattle nailed to a stone. It swung without wind. Rachel touched it and heard a baby crying, followed by a woman's panicked whisper, "Don't let them take him." They heard footsteps in the soft earth behind them, barefoot, slow, deliberate. But when they spun around, no one was visible. Still, the soil had footprints, child-sized, fresh, leading toward an open crypt door they hadn't seen before. Inside the crypt lay a weathered Bible, hollowed out to hide a leather journal. It belonged to Reverend Elijah Clay. His writings told of rituals done to bind restless spirits under the crimson oaks. He mentioned a curse. Those who entered would slowly lose their names, their memories, their place among the living. Marcus suddenly asked, "Who are you?" Rachel froze. "It's me, Rachel." But he looked confused, disoriented. "Where are we?" His phone had photos from earlier, but he didn't recognize himself. His name tag on his jacket was fading, letter by letter. A tall man in a tattered preacher's robe stood near the graves. He had no eyes, just sunken sockets filled with ash. He spoke in a guttural whisper. "You took what is buried. Now you must stay." Then vanished, leaving behind a burning black feather. One of the crimson oaks near the crypt started oozing thick, dark blood from its bark. Faces formed in the bark, screaming silently. Marcus stared too long. His own reflection appeared in the tree and blinked, but Marcus didn't. Rachel used her phone's front camera as a mirror, but her reflection smiled when she didn't. It mouthed, "Don't leave me here alone." She dropped the phone in horror, but the reflection remained on the screen, watching her. Desperate to end the nightmare, Rachel dug up the baby's grave. Inside the small coffin was no infant, but a mirror framed in bone. She saw herself, but older, hollow-eyed. The reflection whispered, "You already died here. You just haven't accepted it." A final page in the Reverend's journal stated, "To break the bond, the first tree planted must burn under the full moon." Rachel lit the oak tree with her last match. The bark screamed. Roots twisted. The crypt shook violently. Rachel awoke at home in her dorm bed. It was quiet. Too quiet. She opened her door. Empty halls, classrooms abandoned. No voices. No people. Only one tree stood outside her window, its leaves blood red. And from the branches, something whispered, "Welcome back." Story 3. Every night at 2:17 a.m., the small town of Merrow Creek hears the sound of bells coming from Black Hollow Cemetery. Though there's no church, no bell tower, and no living soul brave enough to go near. Some say it's a warning, others say it's a calling. Olivia, a journalism student, found an old letter hidden in her late grandfather's desk. He had been the last gravedigger of Black Hollow. The letter read, "If the bells ring, never answer them. They don't call the dead, they choose the next." Determined to uncover the truth, Olivia and her brother Ben entered the cemetery at 2:10 a.m. The wind was silent, but the graves seemed to hum. As the bells began tolling, Ben looked up. There was no sky, just darkness, thick like tar, pressing down from above. Near the center of the cemetery, they found a chained iron casket above ground, covered in symbols. Carved on its lid, "Do not unseal before judgment." But Olivia noticed the lock was broken. Someone had already opened it. Ben screamed. A pale hand had reached from the grass and grabbed his ankle. He kicked it off, but it didn't retreat. It dragged itself toward the casket, then vanished inside. Olivia checked the iron box. It was empty, but warm. They met a man with no nose or lips, standing perfectly still near a statue. He whispered, "I am the ninth." Around him were 8 gravestones marked only with Roman numerals. Olivia realized the bells had rung 9 times. There were supposed to be 10. Ben started speaking more slowly, then forgetting words, then names. His reflection in Olivia's phone no longer blinked. When she said Ben, he looked confused, as if the name didn't belong to him anymore. The 10th bell hadn't tolled yet. Statues around the cemetery, angels with broken wings and covered faces, began to shift positions. Each time Olivia turned away, they moved closer. One had its mouth open. Inside, she saw real teeth. Then she heard whispering from every direction. In a sunken grave, Olivia found a stairway of bone leading underground. The walls were made of coffins, some still scratching from inside. At the bottom, a bell hung in the air without chains, tolling with no movement, and around it stood 9 figures, including Ben. There was a 10th pedestal, empty, waiting. A plaque beneath it read, "The 10th must walk willingly, or the hollow takes 2." Ben's eyes met Olivia's, but he didn't recognize her anymore. He extended his hand to her like a stranger. An old woman appeared in the shadows, her skin like wax. She offered Olivia a choice: ring the bell and take his place, or leave and forget he ever lived. Olivia reached for the rope, but paused. She pulled the rope. Nothing happened. Then every bell in the hollow rang at once. Statues wept blood. The sky cracked open like glass. The figures screamed, but Ben was free. He collapsed into her arms. Olivia's shadow, however, remained behind and slowly turned to face the bell. They escaped the hollow, but now every night at 2:17 a.m., Olivia hears a bell in her head. She smiles and waits, because one day the rope will need to be pulled again, and this time she'll be the one to choose who comes next. Story 4. In the sleepy town of Alder Creek, Lantern Hill Cemetery is feared by all. Locals say a single lantern glows there each night, even when it rains, even when no one is there. It never flickers, it never dies out, and it only lights the grave of one man, Elias Monroe, buried in 1901. High school teacher Claire moved to Alder Creek for peace and quiet. On her evening jog, she passed Lantern Hill and noticed something strange. The grave marked Elias Monroe was in a different place every night. She thought it was just exhaustion. Until one night, the grave was right outside the gate. Claire started seeing a figure in the fog. A tall man with a lantern stood motionless among the gravestones. He never approached, never spoke, but every night he was closer. One night she whispered, "Who are you?" He replied, "You already know." In the town library, Claire found a forgotten town logbook. One page had been ripped out and reinserted with different handwriting. It described how Elias Monroe was buried after being accused of grave robbing. But the writer insisted he wasn't a thief. He was a guardian. A guardian of what? A student in Claire's class drew a picture of the man with the lantern. "He talks to me," the boy said. "He says I'll make a good replacement." Claire asked where he heard this. The boy pointed to Lantern Hill, that place with the breathing ground. Claire visited again at dusk. The air was unnaturally warm. She knelt near Elias's grave and placed her hand on the dirt. It moved, a slow rising and falling motion, like lungs inhaling. Then the lantern beside the grave flared brighter, revealing dozens of small childlike footprints all around. The lantern began to glow blue when Claire approached. Inside the flame, she saw letters forming. Names. They were the same names of students from her class, and one name stood out: Claire Matthews, her own. An elderly man visited her classroom the next day. He introduced himself as Calvin Reed, the only child who ever came back after being touched by Elias. He said nothing for 60 years, until now. "You don't escape him. You just delay your place." Claire looked through old photos of her childhood. In one, she saw a young girl standing next to the same lantern. Decades ago, the girl was her. She had been to Lantern Hill before, but she had no memory of it. The back of the photo read, "First chosen, still unclaimed." That night, Lantern Hill was different. A circle of 12 lanterns surrounded the entire graveyard. Each one bore a name. Claire's lantern had already been lit. A voice whispered from the dark, "When your light fades, the ground will rise for you." Claire begged for escape. The spirit of Elias appeared, offering a bargain. "Bring me one soul, a child, a stranger, a thief, anyone, or burn in my stead." She refused, but her body felt heavy. Her breath came slower. She realized the lantern fed off life, her life. Desperate, Claire smashed one of the 12 lanterns. The ground roared, trees bent backward, and the figure of Elias screamed, not in pain, but in rage. She ran, throwing the other lanterns into the river. As the final one sank, the grave of Elias collapsed into itself, vanishing completely. Weeks passed. The cemetery went quiet. Until one foggy evening, a jogger stopped by the cemetery gate. There, glowing softly under the old oak, was a single lantern, and carved into the tree behind it, Claire Matthews, 1988 to 2024. Story 5. Briarwood Cemetery sat on the edge of a swamp in Louisiana, where fog clung low and the air smelled of decay. The townspeople said the crosses on the graves would turn crooked the night before someone died, always facing the house of the next soul to be taken. When 17-year-old Lily moved to Briarwood with her father, the cemetery was the first place she noticed. A week later, she saw a funeral with no mourners. A single priest stood by a casket, no name on the tombstone, no obituary. The next morning, their neighbor was found dead in bed, his mouth wide open in horror. One afternoon, Lily wandered too close to the graveyard and saw a wooden cross turning slowly by itself. It bent until it pointed toward her house. That night, she heard whispers outside her bedroom window. "Do you feel it yet? The roots know your name." There was now a new grave near the entrance. It bore her name, Lily Jameson, and tomorrow's date. She ran to tell her father, but when they returned, it was gone. He thought she was imagining things, but she started sleeping with the light on. Lily met an old man digging a plot. He stared at her and whispered, "You're marked. I've seen the crooked one since I was 10. You break the curse by feeding the earth, someone it doesn't expect." Then he handed her a shovel. Lily found her own backyard unusually soft. Digging revealed old coffin nails and a buried photo of her. scratched across the face. Her father admitted their land had once been part of the cemetery long ago. They said it was safe, but we never asked who stayed behind. That night, Lily heard knocks from inside the walls. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS. She followed the sound to the basement. On the floor was a small door with rusty hinges. Behind it, darkness, and something breathing. Inside the crawl space, she found dozens of small animal bones and a child's skull. On the wall, the message, buried without a name, buried without a prayer. The cemetery didn't just take, it punished the forgotten. At midnight, one cross began to bleed. Thick black tears dripped from its wood as it spun violently toward the Jameson house. Then came the screaming from the marsh, high, unnatural, echoing with a dozen voices. Lily found her father's locked box. Inside, a journal. He had been born in Briarwood. His twin sister, Lucy, died at birth but was never buried. The family left the body in the swamp to avoid shame. She always hated being left alone. The final page read, "The next night, a girl in a tattered dress appeared in the yard. She looked exactly like Lily, but paler, older, with black eyes. 'You took my name,' she said. 'Now I take your place.' The earth beneath Lily's feet began to open. Lily begged for a way to stop it. The gravedigger returned one last time. She was never given her rest. Only one can stay. One must willingly go beneath. Lily made her choice. She walked into the cemetery alone, cross in hand, and laid it down at the oldest grave. The next morning, all the crooked crosses were straight again. Briarwood was silent. Lily's father found her room empty, but on her bed lay a wooden cross, perfectly straight, freshly carved. The grave by the gate had a new name, Lily Jameson, returned, and the marsh stopped whispering. For now. Story 6. In Massachusetts, on the edge of the woods behind an abandoned church, sits Gallows Hill Cemetery. At its center stands a blackened oak tree, once used for public hangings during the 1600s. Now, locals say if you stand near it long enough, you'll feel someone breathing behind you, grinning. Teenagers dared each other to sleep in the graveyard. Only one ever returned, mumbling nonsense and missing every single tooth. In his pocket was a note written in dirt. He took them for smiling without permission. Harper, a thrill-seeking podcaster, went to Gallows Hill to record an episode on forgotten execution grounds. Her producer, Nolan, warned her it wasn't just legend. They don't bury bodies there. They bury guilt. Harper laughed it off and went alone at nightfall. Among the mossy graves, Harper found one with a carved face instead of a name. The face smiled, wide, unnatural, almost mocking. Below it read, Miles Grinley, hung but never silenced. That name wasn't in any record, but her audio recorder picked up heavy breathing and faint chuckling. At 3:13 a.m., Harper heard rope creaking. She turned and saw a noose swinging from the oak, but no one around. She left. The next morning, a rope burn was around her neck. She hadn't told anyone, but her producer texted, "Who whispered swing again in last night's audio?" Nolan went to investigate the next night. He never came back. His phone was found at the base of the hanging tree. The last video, it showed him staring at something above the camera, whispering, "He's smiling at me." Then static. Harper discovered a childhood game called Hangman's Smile, once played by local kids, drawing smiling faces on paper, then burying them under the tree. Legend said if the drawing was gone by morning, someone nearby would hang themselves by week's end. That game was banned in 1982. Bones began appearing in her home, clean, arranged in the shape of puppets. Her cat hissed at corners. Her mirror reflected someone grinning when she wasn't. On the wall, scratched in deep, "You owe a smile." The tree's bark began changing. Eyes appeared. Too real, too wet. They blinked. One had Nolan's blue iris. Another, her own brown eye. The tree whispered now in a dozen voices. Grin. Hang. Repeat. Harper found court records hidden beneath the church ruins. Miles Grinley had been a preacher accused of smiling at executions. He believed death set people free. He was hanged laughing and cursed the land. Let no one smile without paying the price. On the 11th night, Harper returned and saw them. Dozens of gray, thin figures with bleeding gums and sunken eyes, mouths frozen open in horrid smiles, each missing their teeth. They surrounded the tree, chanting wordlessly. She climbed the tree at dawn and placed one of her own teeth into a knot in the bark. The breathing stopped. The whispers faded. For a moment, the cemetery went silent. The gravestone of Miles cracked, his face now frowning. Harper returned home. The audio from the last night was clear. No laughter, no whispers, until the very end. A single voice spoke. "Thank you for your smile. I kept one for you." And in her mirror, Miles stood behind her, still smiling. Story 7. In Maple County, Oregon, there's a cemetery where sound vanishes. Locals call it Stillmore. No birds sing near it. No wind moves the trees. If you speak within its gates, your voice simply disappears. The deeper you go, the quieter you become, until you hear them whisper back. A famous paranormal investigator, Jordan Reese, visited Stillmore with a microphone set to high gain. He never returned. His equipment was found just beyond the gate, recording static and something else. Faint voices whispering. He screamed, but we kept it. High school student Avery liked chasing urban legends. She and her friend Cole visited Stillmore with a plan: test the myth. Cole clapped once. No sound. Avery spoke. Nothing. Their video feed had no audio, only captions they manually added later. And behind them, just barely visible, a blurry figure followed. They reached the cemetery center, a stone pavilion with no roof. Inside, voices returned, but only one word echoed. "Stay?" Cole tried to leave the circle, but his legs refused to move. It took Avery pulling him out to break the trance. From that night on, Cole began losing his hearing. They returned to town and spoke with the cemetery's former caretaker, an old man named Elijah, now mute. He handed them a dusty book, The Pact of Silence. Inside were records from the 1800s, explaining how the land was cursed after a mass hanging. The voices of the condemned were sealed beneath the soil. Back in Stillmore, Avery found a tomb with no name, only a jagged symbol carved deep, a slash through a mouth. As she touched it, she heard a scream, not in her ears but inside her mind. Cole fell to his knees, nose bleeding. He whispered, "Someone just screamed my name." That night, Cole could no longer speak. His mouth moved, but nothing came out, not even breath. Avery dreamed of a tall, faceless man placing hands on her throat, smiling. He whispered without lips, "You'll never need words again." A week later, a man appeared at Avery's door, Jordan Reese. He was thinner, silent, with completely black eyes. He handed her his journal and walked into the woods without another word. The final page read, "Some voices never stop. They only wait to be heard." Avery began to lose sounds around her. Her phone alarm, the TV, the rain. One day she found a note under her pillow. The quieter your world, the louder ours becomes. She couldn't remember falling asleep. Digging near the nameless tomb, Avery uncovered a coffin, intact, though centuries old. Inside was a recording device. It played a single sentence over and over. Don't speak. He hears through your words. That night she dreamed of bearing her own voice under that tomb. Still more expanded. Trees stopped rustling miles away. Radios died. The town's dogs stopped barking. Cole vanished from his room, leaving behind only a whisper in Avery's mind. He took my voice. He's coming for yours. In desperation, Avery returned to the cemetery and stood in the stone pavilion. She forced out one final scream, loud, painful, ripping her vocal cords. The ground shook, the whispering stopped, but her voice never returned. Avery now walks the edges of Stillmore, warning others in writing, if you hear the whisper, it's already too late. The cemetery is silent once more, except every now and then, someone thinks they hear a faint voice, screaming from beneath the earth. Story 8. Every year on the last night of October, a woman in a white dress walks through Redfern Cemetery in Ohio. Locals call her the Widow. They say she's looking for someone or something that was never buried properly, and those who follow her never return. 4 college students, Tori, Mason, Elena, and Bryce, decided to film a Halloween ghost challenge in Redfern. The goal? Follow the widow for as long as possible. Tori didn't believe in ghosts. Mason thought it would boost their channel. Bryce brought a spirit box, and Elena felt uneasy from the start. They entered the cemetery at midnight. All was quiet until Bryce's spirit box crackled with one word. Wait. That's when the temperature dropped. Elena noticed white petals falling from the sky. Mason picked one up. It turned to ash in his hand. In the center of the cemetery was a grave sealed in iron and stone, with heavy chains crisscrossing the slab. It read, Martha Elwood, 1842 to 1870. Do not disturb her sleep, Tori laughed. Looks like someone didn't want her getting out. At 1:03 a.m., a thick mist rolled in, and she appeared. A woman in white, her veil trailing behind her like smoke. She walked barefoot between the graves, stopping occasionally to whisper into the earth. Elena whispered, she's not looking for someone. She's listening. Bryce followed too closely, filming. When the widow turned to him, his camera glitched violently. His last words were, guys! Then he vanished. No scream, no sound, just gone. His camera dropped, still recording the swaying veil in the distance. Tori and Mason watched the footage. When they rewound it, the widow mouthed something. Elena read her lips. Don't say his name. They had no idea who he was, until Mason found a hidden plaque behind a crumbling tombstone. Thomas Elwood, died 1870, the same year Martha died. They searched local records and discovered a grim tale. Thomas Elwood was Martha's husband. He had buried her alive after accusing her of witchcraft. Days later, he was found torn to pieces. Locals claimed her ghost wouldn't rest until his spirit was found and burned. Back at the cemetery, Mason said it aloud. Thomas Elwood. The wind howled, all the lanterns went out, and the widow screamed, not like a ghost, like a furious, wounded soul waking from centuries of silence. The chained grave was now open, empty. Claw marks lined the inside of the coffin. At the foot of the grave, Mason's name was freshly etched into the stone. He turned to run, but his voice disappeared. His feet stopped moving. He was already part of the ground, Elena begged the widow for mercy. The spirit whispered into her ear, "Give me his soul, or yours." Elena dropped the journal they'd found, Thomas's own diary, filled with confessions. The wind caught it and burned it midair. The veil blew backward. The widow smiled. Tori and Elena escaped. But days later, Elena began sleepwalking. She'd wake up outside, whispering, "Have you seen my husband?" The white petals followed her. Her reflection sometimes wore a veil. And Tori, she hasn't slept since. Because every time she blinks, she sees a woman in white at the foot of her bed. Red Fern Cemetery is quiet now. The chained grave has been resealed. But a new inscription was added. Tread lightly. She waits for another. And on the wind, on certain nights, you can still hear a soft voice calling, "Thomas." Story 9. In northern Montana, there's a reservoir called Grave Dust Creek. Beneath its still, black waters lies the drowned town of Levitt's Hollow and its old cemetery. When the dam was built in 1954, the bodies were never moved. Sometimes on moonless nights, bubbles rise, and then the dead walk wet. Brothers Leo and Travis were amateur explorers filming forgotten American history. They heard rumors of headstones sticking out during drought years. On a hot August afternoon, they found one, a mossy grave marker jutting from the water with no name, only a carving of a weeping willow. Travis dove with a GoPro. The water got darker too quickly. At 15 feet, the camera picked up structures, rotting fences, half-buried headstones. Then, something swam past behind him. It didn't move like a fish. It moved like a person. That night, Leo sat by the dock reviewing footage. A soft voice whispered, "Help me float." He turned. No one there. But on his neck, wet fingerprints remained, cold and shaped like a child's hand. The next morning, a full coffin surfaced, bloated, wooden, split open. Inside, a skeleton sat upright, mouth open. On the forehead, a rusty nail had been hammered in and carved into the coffin wood, "She should not have sunk." An old woman named Elna approached them at their motel. She once lived in Levitt's Hollow. "They lied," she said. "They said the grave would be moved. But the mayor left them. Now the drowned don't sleep. They trade places." "Places with what?" Leo asked. "Us," she said. That night, Travis had a nightmare, sinking slowly into darkness, surrounded by pale hands dragging him down. When he woke, his skin smelled like algae, and on his chest someone had written in lake mud, "You were warm." The next day, the town sheriff pulled a body from the water. It wore 1950s clothing, eyes open, smiling. But the skin was fresh. Travis recognized the shirt. It was his, but he was still standing beside Leo, or so they thought. Leo noticed Travis stopped blinking, stopped asking questions. His voice sounded off. "What's our mom's name?" Leo asked. Travis tilted his head. "Doesn't matter." That night, Leo heard dripping in the motel hallway. When he opened the door, water flooded in. 6 more coffins surfaced, all broken, all empty. The lake level kept dropping. Locals panicked. Fish vanished. The sheriff disappeared. At dusk, townspeople saw figures standing on the water, watching, their clothes heavy, their smiles wide. Elna told Leo there was only one way to seal the drowned again: complete the burial. One must willingly lie in the water, awake, while the drowned are read their names aloud. She handed Leo a wet, unreadable book, The Ledger of the Lost. Leo stood waist-deep in the freezing lake, reading the names aloud. One by one, the figures sank, all except one, Travis. Or the thing wearing Travis's face. You forgot mine, it said. Leo whispered, Travis Michael Ward. The copy grinned. Too late. The lake was calm the next morning. Clear, still. But now there's a new grave marker beside the dock. Leo Ward, drowned but remembered. And every year one more coffin surfaces. Because someone always forgets a name. Story 10, Elmshade Cemetery in Vermont was small, only 63 plots, but no one who worked there ever lasted long, except one man, Mr. Corbin, the silent caretaker who lived on the grounds. Every night, a single lantern burned in the caretaker's shack. Locals said if that light ever went out, the dead would forget they were buried. Ben Whitaker, a young man down on luck, was hired to replace Mr. Corbin, who had gone missing without a word. On his first night, the gravekeeper's journal was waiting in the shack. First line read, Never let the lantern go out. Never answer your name after midnight. Plot number 17 was shallow on Ben's first day, but on the second, it had grown, wider, deeper. Though no burial was scheduled, by day 5 the headstone read, Ben Whitaker, 1995 to 2025. Ben laughed it off. Then he noticed his birth date was exactly right. One stormy night, Ben heard knocking, but not at the door. It came from beneath the floorboards. He pried up a plank and found compacted soil. Then a voice whispered, I'm here early. Let me in. At 2:12 a.m., someone knocked at the door. An old woman stood outside, pale and eyeless, with a scarf over her mouth. She held out a cracked mirror and whispered, He doesn't know his face anymore. Show him. Then she vanished. That night, for the first time, the lantern flickered. The journal flipped on its own to a warning. If the light dies, don't run. Bury your own name before sunrise. Ben didn't understand, but the shadows under the trees were moving, reaching. At midnight, the wind carried whispers through the graveyard. Names, names of the dead, names of the living. Then Ben heard his own name whispered from under the soil. The voice sounded like Mr. Corbin. He found a grave behind the shack. It hadn't been there before. Corbin Ellis died protecting the light. Ben remembered the journal said Corbin disappeared, but now it seemed he had died protecting something far worse than just a flame. At exactly 3 a.m., the lantern died, and something stepped out of the shadows. It didn't walk. It slithered through the air, cloaked in burlap and bone, wearing dozens of stolen faces stitched together. And it called out sweetly, Benny boy, you forgot to bury your name. The graves began to open, not with violence, but with purpose. Figures rose, empty-eyed and smiling, each with mouths stitched shut. They surrounded Ben and began digging a new plot at his feet. Ben begged for mercy. The stitched-face figure offered him a deal. One name for another. Someone must take your place. Ben thought of his brother, his landlord, his old boss. He whispered a name. The lantern burst into flame again. The stitched beings shrieked and returned to their graves. The figure in burlap smiled and said, We'll wait for the flame to die again, and next time you won't have a name to trade. Then the grave sealed itself. Ben remained the caretaker. Each night he tends the lantern, and on the first page of the journal, he's added a new line. If you hear your name in the wind, don't answer. It might not be calling you. It might be calling you back. Story 11. At the edge of Ravenhill, Tennessee, lies a forgotten graveyard known for one thing, a marble mausoleum with no name. Its only feature? Dozens of cracked mirrors lining the interior walls. People who visit say their reflection doesn't always move when they do. Vlogger couple Maddie and Joel went to Ravenhill to film a Haunted America episode. Locals refused to talk about the graveyard. One old woman finally warned them, "That place doesn't reflect you. It remembers you." They entered the mausoleum at dusk. No names, no symbols, just a cold marble floor and tarnished mirrors. Maddie waved at her reflection. It didn't wave back. Joel laughed. Creepy tech glitch? The mirrors stayed still a second longer than they should have. Later that night, Maddie reviewed the footage. In the background of every clip, a woman stood behind them, visible only in the mirrors, pale with a shattered face. Joel claimed it was edited in, but Maddie swore she saw her in the hotel mirror too. The next morning, Joel found a crack running through the bathroom mirror, with blood oozing from it. It didn't drip. It ran upward. Maddie said she dreamed the woman touched her cheek and whispered, "I'm almost through." They left town that afternoon, but something followed. In their apartment, every reflection was slightly off. Maddie smiled. Her reflection didn't. Joel blinked, but the mirror version kept staring. They started covering mirrors. At night, scratching noises came from under the sheets they taped up. On the wall behind the living room mirror, they found this carved in shallow letters. Only one gets to leave. One night, Joel looked into the hallway mirror and saw nothing. He wasn't there. He turned to Maddie and screamed, but Maddie could still see his reflection, and it was smiling at her. Desperate, Maddie returned alone to the mausoleum. Inside, she found a new mirror, fresh and clean, etched at the bottom, "For the traded soul." And in the reflection, Joel, now on the inside of the glass, begging to be pulled back. The woman with the shattered face appeared again. She offered Maddie a trade. 2 days of your face and I'll give you 1 hour with him. Maddie agreed. Her reflection shattered. Blood trickled from her eyes. For 1 hour, Joel and Maddie stood together in the glass realm. He warned her, "If you stay longer, your soul gets mirrored." Repeated, forever. She ran, but left something behind. Her shadow. Back in her apartment, Maddie found all the mirrors were blank. Until midnight. Then one by one they lit up again, and her face appeared in all of them. Only, she wasn't moving. She wasn't smiling. She was watching. Maddie now lives without mirrors. No reflections, no selfies, no windows at night. But every full moon, she hears glass cracking behind her closet. And sometimes, just sometimes, her reflection knocks from the inside. Story 12. In colonial times, people feared being buried alive. At Blackstone Cemetery in Rhode Island, every grave once had a small bell above ground, attached to a string leading down to the coffin. If someone woke up underground, they could ring. But now, the bells are rusted, except for one. Teenager Noah worked part-time mowing grass at Blackstone. One foggy morning he heard it. Ting, ting, ting. A bell ringing softly. Grave 213. A grave with no name, no date. Just a bell still swaying, long after the wind had stopped. Noah told his grandfather, a retired groundskeeper. The old man turned pale. That grave was never filled, he said. But that night Noah dreamed of dirt under his fingernails and screaming from beneath the earth. Curious, Noah dug near grave 213 and found a piece of parchment, a death certificate, never signed. Cause of death, mistaken burial. At the bottom, a single word was written in red ink: awake. Overnight, the other bells, long fallen or missing, reappeared, standing upright, shining like new. They began to ring randomly at night, one, then three, then all at once. Locals thought it was a prank until the shadows began standing between headstones. Noah awoke to find dirt on his sheets, his closet door open. In the corner of the room, muddy footprints, a tooth on his pillow. His grandfather confessed in 1976, a man was buried alive in grave 213. The string snapped. The bell never rang. The body was found face down in claw marks. They buried him again, without the bell. He's been waiting to ring ever since. Now it wasn't just the bells ringing, phones, alarm clocks, wind chimes, all ringing at once at 2:13 a.m., the time the man was buried. And in every tone, Noah heard it clearly. Let me out. Noah and his friend Jess broke into the cemetery after dark to open grave 213. The coffin lid wasn't nailed shut. Inside, no body, just a piece of cloth with the words, "Rung too late." And then the bell began ringing from inside Jess's backpack. Jess stopped breathing later that night. Doctors couldn't explain it. Her lungs were full of grave soil. When they opened her hand, they found a piece of rusty string. Desperate, Noah returned to the cemetery with a hammer and cut the bell from grave 213. At once, the other bells fell silent, and then the earth began to pulse, like something breathing below. He heard the voice again. You owe me a breath. He built his own grave, dug it by hand, attached a bell, climbed in. Then he waited. At 2:13 a.m., he pulled the string. The bell rang once. Everything went black. Noah was found alive, next morning, outside grave 213. Dirt under his nails, eyes wide open, mute. But now a new grave sits beside 213. Noah Brooks, 2007 too. The bell above it, shiny, polished, still ringing every night. And if you listen close, the string moves, even when no one is there. Thank you for listening to tonight's chilling tale. If this story gave you goosebumps, don't forget to leave a like and share it with someone brave enough to listen. We post new horror stories every week, haunted places, restless spirits, and whispers from the shadows. So make sure to subscribe and tap the bell icon so you won't miss the next nightmare. Until next time, keep your lights on. And remember, some stories never stay buried.